I drove into the town of Evergreen Falls on a Tuesday evening in late October, when the rain had just begun its seasonal claim on the Pacific Northwest. The kind of rain that doesn't announce itself. It simply exists, a gray constant that blurs the boundary between sky and earth. My Honda's headlights caught the green glow of the Evergreen RX sign long before I could make out the building itself, a beacon pulsing through the mist like something trying to signal from underwater. The pharmacy sat at an awkward intersection where Highway 26 bent east toward the Cascade foothills, flanked on one side by a McDonald's that had seen better decades and on the other by a wall of Douglas fir so dense it looked like a stage curtain hiding something vast and unknowable. The building itself was aggressively mundane, a standard big-box pharmacy layout, all glass frontage and industrial efficiency, the kind of place that could exist in any American town and thereby exist in none of them particularly. I was 28 and catastrophically broke, which is how I'd ended up here. Portland had chewed me up efficiently, a relationship that ended when I discovered my girlfriend of 3 years had been planning her exit for 6 months. A pharmacy tech certification that hadn't translated into the stable income I'd imagined, and credit card debt that had metastasized from manageable to crushing with frightening speed. When the recruiter mentioned that Evergreen RX paid a 30% differential for overnight shifts, I'd stopped listening to the rest. Quiet town, she'd said. Low cost of living. A chance to save money and figure things out. What I hadn't considered was why they needed to pay so much more. My training shift started at 4 p.m., time to overlap with the day crew before transitioning into the skeleton staff of night. Rita Kowalski, the day shift lead tech, was a compact woman in her 50s with the efficient warmth of someone who'd perfected the art of training new hires, while simultaneously managing a dozen other tasks. She walked me through the basics with practiced patience, how to process insurance claims in the system, where the fast movers were shelved, the exact angle to tilt bottles for the counting tray, the diplomatic phrasing required when telling customers their copay would be $200 instead of $20. "You'll do fine," she said around 8 p.m., after I'd successfully filled my first solo prescription, a Z-Pack for someone named Patricia Voss who'd smiled tiredly at me through the glass partition and said, "Welcome to town, honey." Rita was restocking the blood pressure monitor display, her movements automatic. Night shifts are actually easier once you get used to them. Fewer customers, less chaos, just you and whatever comes through the door. The phrasing struck me as odd. Whatever comes through the door rather than whoever. But I attributed it to fatigue. It had been a long day. By 10 p.m., the day staff had trickled away in ones and twos, calling out goodbyes that echoed in the increasingly empty store. The pharmacist who'd been on duty, a cheerful woman named Ellen who'd spent most of her time counseling a very concerned patient about statins, clocked out at 10:30. The front-end cashier, a teenager who'd been audibly FaceTiming friends between customers, left at 11. That's when Dr. Hahn arrived. I'd been told the overnight pharmacist would be experienced and knowledgeable, which I'd assumed was recruiter speak for old and set in his ways. Dr. Henry Hahn was indeed in his 50s with steel gray hair trimmed efficiently short and the kind of exhaustion that lives in a person's eyes rather than their posture. He wore the standard white coat, name badge precisely centered, and moved through the pharmacy bay with the economy of motion that comes from doing the same tasks in the same space for years. "Jordan Malik?" he asked, though he clearly already knew. His voice was quiet, carefully modulated, like someone who'd trained himself not to startle easily. "Yes, sir. Good to meet you." He nodded once, set down his travel mug, something that smelled like green tea, and immediately began his own routine. Logging into the system, checking the pending queue, scanning the inventory report that the day shift had generated. I tried to stay out of his way while simultaneously looking useful, a dance I'd perfected in every new job. We worked in near silence for the better part of an hour. A man came in at 11:20 to pick up Ambien, apologizing for the late hour. A woman in scrubs grabbed cough syrup from the shelves and paid at the front register, which I'd been shown how to monitor from the pharmacy terminal. The fluorescent lights hummed their eternal monotone. Rain whispered against the windows. At 11:50, Dr. Han locked the side door. It was a heavy door, steel core with a push bar on the inside and a card reader on the exterior, opening onto what I'd been told was the delivery alley where pharmaceutical shipments arrived. I'd glanced out earlier. Just a narrow strip of wet asphalt, a dumpster, the looming wall of the forest beyond. Dr. Han tested the lock twice, then placed a small orange cone in front of it on the inside. "Delivery protocols?" I asked, trying to demonstrate that I understood security procedures. "No," he said. Then after a pause, "It's just something we do." He returned to the counter and reached under the register, producing a laminated sheet that had been slipped into a clear plastic sleeve. The plastic was scratched and clouded, suggesting long use. He set it on the counter between us. "This might seem unusual," Dr. Han said, his tone still carefully neutral. "Previous techs found it helpful." I picked up the sheet. At the top, in a bold, institutional font, it read, "Evergreen RX, Night Shift, Survival Rules." I actually laughed, a short, nervous sound that echoed too loud in the empty pharmacy bay. "Is this like a hazing thing?" Dr. Han didn't smile. He simply watched me with those tired eyes, waiting. I read, "Rule 1. Lock the side pharmacy door at 11 p.m. and do not open it for anyone, even staff, until 600 a.m. Rule 3. If a customer enters between 2:14 and 2:29 a.m. and does not track rainwater or dirt, do not speak to them. Let them browse. They will leave. Rule 5. Never under any circumstances fill a prescription written for room 12 after midnight. We do not serve that ward. Rule 7. Do not look directly into the convex mirror above aisle 7 after 3 a.m. There were others, but these were the ones that caught my attention immediately, primarily because they made absolutely no sense. I looked up at Dr. Han, expecting some indication that this was indeed a joke, some elaborate ritual for new hires. His expression hadn't changed. "I don't understand," I said carefully. "You don't need to," he replied. "Just follow them. Everyone who lasted did." The word "lasted" settled into my chest like a cold stone. What happens if I don't? Dr. Han was quiet for a long moment, his gaze drifting toward the windows where our reflections hung against the darkness outside. "Some things are easier to prevent than to fix," he said finally. "The rules exist because people learn them the hard way. I'm simply saving you the education." He picked up his tea and moved toward the back room, pausing at the doorway. "I'll be doing inventory counts in the back for most of the night. You'll handle the counter. If you need me, use the intercom. Don't leave the pharmacy bay unless absolutely necessary. And if I have questions about the rules?" "You won't," he said. "When the situation arises, you'll recognize it." Then he was gone, leaving me alone at the counter with the laminated sheet and the growing awareness that I had somehow accepted a job without asking nearly enough questions. I looked at the rules again. Rule 3's specificity bothered me most, not just a time range, but the detail about tracking rainwater. Rule 5 referenced room 12 as though it were a location I should recognize, a ward that apparently required service cutoffs at midnight. Rule 7 suggested that looking at a security mirror could be dangerous, but only after a specific time. These weren't safety protocols. They read like instructions for navigating something that shouldn't exist. I told myself it was just small-town weirdness, the kind of superstitious ritual that develops in isolated workplaces. I'd worked retail long enough to know that every store develops its own culture, its own in-jokes and traditions. This was probably just an elaborate way to make the overnight shift feel special, to give new hires something to talk about. But as midnight crept closer and the store settled into its after-hours rhythm, fluorescent lights humming, refrigerators cycling through their compressor sequences, the automatic doors occasionally hissing open for no reason I could determine, I found myself reading the rules again and again. Outside, the rain intensified. The green pharmacy sign reflected in the wet parking lot like something drowning, pulsing its signal to no one at all. The first 2 hours passed in a kind of suspended normalcy that I kept waiting to break. I filled 3 prescriptions that came through the overnight queue, transfers from other pharmacies, things people needed ready for early morning pickup. I organized the pickup bins by last name, restocked the antibiotic shelf, and learned the particular rhythm of an empty store, the way sounds carried differently without customers to absorb them, how the refrigerator units in the far aisles clicked on in sequence like something communicating in code. At 1:30 a.m., a man came through for metformin and told me about his daughter's college acceptance. At 1:50, someone called asking about their prescription status, and I navigated the insurance system well enough to give them an answer. Normal, retail, boring even in the way that night shifts can sand down time into something shapeless. I had nearly forgotten about the laminated rules. Then at 2:14 a.m., the automatic doors opened. I glanced up from the insurance claim I was processing, an automatic gesture. Customer service training so deeply embedded that I was preparing my greeting before consciously registering what I was seeing. A woman stood just inside the entrance, caught in the specific quality of light that exists only in retail spaces at night. Too bright, too even, eliminating shadows in a way that makes everything look slightly unreal. She wore a thin hospital gown, the kind with the open back, and over it a generic gray hoodie that looked sized for someone else. Her hair hung in damp strands around her face, but the entrance mat was dry. I stared at it, the heavy-duty floor mat designed to absorb moisture, placed precisely where it would catch rainwater from incoming customers. It was completely dry, the kind of dry that doesn't happen during Oregon autumn, when moisture is a constant atmospheric presence. The woman's clothes looked damp. Her hair suggested recent rain exposure, but she left no wet footprints as she moved past the greeting card display, no trail of water following her progression into the store. My eyes went to the clock above the pharmacy counter, 2:16 a.m. Rule 3. If a customer enters between 2:14 and 2:29 a.m. and does not track rainwater or dirt, do not speak to them. Let them browse. They will leave. The rule suddenly felt less like hazing and more like a specific warning, the kind that emerges from a particular incident. I found myself gripping the edge of the counter, my greeting dying unspoken. The woman moved down aisle 3, digestive health, with a strange, gliding quality to her movement. Not floating, nothing so cinematic, but moving as though the floor offered no resistance. Her hands reached toward items occasionally, fingers hovering near bottles of Tums and Pepto-Bismol, but never quite making contact. She didn't pick anything up, didn't examine labels, just maintained that hovering gesture like someone remembering the action rather than performing it. Every instinct I had, every customer service protocol I'd internalized, screamed at me to approach her. "Can I help you find something?" was such an automatic response that I had to physically bite the inside of my cheek to prevent myself from speaking. She was clearly confused, possibly in distress. A hospital gown suggested medical crisis, vulnerability, someone who needed help. But the mat was dry, and it was 2:17 a.m. I forced myself to look away to return my attention to the computer screen where the insurance claim still waited. The words blurred. I couldn't focus on them, couldn't parse what they meant. My peripheral vision tracked the woman as she drifted into aisle 5, then 6, her movements deliberate but purposeless. That's when I noticed the monitors. The pharmacy had 6 small screens mounted above the counter, each showing a different security camera angle. Front entrance, checkout lanes, aisles 1-3, aisles 4-6, aisles 7-9, and the pharmacy bay itself. Standard loss prevention setup. I'd been trained to glance at them periodically to watch for shoplifters or customers who might need assistance. I looked at the aisles 4-6 monitor, the camera angle that should be capturing the woman's current location. The screen showed empty aisles, shelves perfectly visible, fluorescent light reflecting off polished tile, but no person. I could see the exact spot where she should be standing, aisle 6 near the allergy medications, but the camera registered only absence. My hands went cold. I looked directly at aisle 6, squinting through the glass partition. She was there, physically present, hoodie gray against the bright shelving. Then back to the monitor. Empty aisle, no anomaly, no glitch in the footage to suggest a technical malfunction. The system couldn't see her, or wouldn't. The woman continued her browsing, if it could be called that. The pantomime of shopping without the actual engagement. She spent nearly 10 minutes moving through the store, never approaching the pharmacy counter, never looking in my direction. At one point, she stood in front of the feminine hygiene section for a full 3 minutes, motionless, hands at her sides. I didn't speak. I barely breathed. The rule had said, "Let them browse," implying passivity, non-engagement. I stayed behind the counter, my finger hovering over the intercom button that would page Dr. Hahn, but uncertain what I would even say. At 2:27 a.m., the woman turned toward the exit. She walked with that same gliding motion, passing the greeting cards, the seasonal display of Halloween candy that hadn't sold, the tire pressure gauge hanging near the door. The automatic doors opened for her. At least they registered her presence even if the cameras didn't, and she stepped out into the parking lot. The moment the doors closed behind her, I released a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. It came out shaky, audible in the empty store. Then the door chime sounded again. I looked up sharply, but the entrance was empty. The doors remained closed. The chime had rung as though someone had entered, triggering the sensor, but nothing had crossed the threshold. On the monitor showing the front entrance, the automatic doors were still, closed against the night. The parking lot beyond was empty except for my Honda and Dr. Hahn's Subaru, both beaded with rain under the parking lot lights. I stood there for a full minute, watching the monitors, waiting for some explanation. A technical glitch. A delayed sensor trigger. Anything normal. Nothing happened. Finally, I made myself move to the front of the store, my footsteps too loud in the silence. The entrance mat was still completely dry. I checked it carefully, running my fingers across the surface. Bone dry, not even residual dampness. Beyond the glass doors, the parking lot was thoroughly wet, puddles reflecting the pharmacy sign. Someone who walked through that parking lot and entered this store should have tracked water. It was physically impossible not to. I returned to the pharmacy counter on unsteady legs and looked at the laminated rules again. Rule 3. If a customer enters between 2:14 and 2:29 a.m. and does not track rainwater or dirt, do not speak to them. Let them browse. They will leave. The rule hadn't explained why. It hadn't prepared me for the absence on the security cameras, for the fundamental wrongness of watching someone move through space while technology insisted they weren't there. It had simply provided instructions, and I had followed them, and the woman had left. Exactly as promised. I considered paging Dr. Hahn, but what would I say? That I'd followed the rules and they'd worked? that something impossible had happened and then resolved itself. He'd already made it clear that questions would answer themselves, that recognition would come naturally. He'd been right. I now understood with a certainty that made my chest tight that the rules weren't hazing. They weren't superstition or small-town eccentricity. They were procedures developed through trial and error, protocols written in response to specific recurring phenomena that defied rational explanation. The woman in the hospital gown had been here before, probably many times, and someone at some point had learned what happened when you spoke to her, when you acknowledged her presence during those specific 15 minutes. The rule existed to prevent that outcome. I didn't want to know what that outcome was. For the rest of the shift, I kept glancing at the entrance, at the clock, at the monitors. The store remained quiet. Normal customers, the kind who tracked rainwater and appeared on camera, came through for emergency medications and travel supplies. Dawn crept in around 6 a.m., gray light replacing the artificial brightness. Dr. Han emerged from the back room at 6:15, looking exactly as tired as he had when he'd entered. He glanced at me, at the laminated rules still sitting on the counter, and something shifted in his expression. Not quite relief, but perhaps a recognition of survival. "Any issues?" he asked. I almost said no. Then, "A woman came in around 2:15, hospital gown. She didn't track any water." Dr. Han nodded slowly. "And?" "I didn't speak to her. She browsed and left." "Good," he said simply. He picked up the rules and slid them back under the register. "That's good." He didn't ask for details, didn't seem surprised, just accepted my report as confirmation of expected events. The day shift began arriving at 6:30. Rita came in at 7, bright and energetic, asking how my first night had gone. I told her it was quiet, uneventful. She seemed pleased. I drove home through morning rain, my hands steady on the wheel, but my mind replaying the woman's hovering hands, the empty security footage, the dry mat. By the time I reached my apartment, a studio above a coffee shop, cheap rent for obvious reasons, exhaustion had numbed the sharp edges of fear into something manageable. I slept through the day, dreamless and heavy. But when I woke at 3 p.m. to prepare for my second shift, I found myself already cataloging the rules, memorizing them with the thoroughness of someone studying for a test where failure carried consequences I couldn't yet imagine. Rule 7 stayed with me particularly. Do not look directly into the convex mirror above aisle 7 after 3 a.m. I told myself I wouldn't need it. I was wrong. My second night began with the introduction of Miguel Torres, a part-time cashier who worked the front registers during peak overnight hours, roughly midnight to 4 a.m., when insomniacs and shift workers needed everything from motor oil to midnight snacks. He was 23, attending community college online, and possessed the specific brand of confidence that comes from being young enough to believe that pattern recognition equals understanding. "You're the new night tech," he said, leaning against the pharmacy counter around 12:30 a.m., after the last of the evening customers had cleared out. "How are you surviving Han's house of horrors?" I was restocking the Z-Pack shelf, trying to maintain the careful alphabetization that Rita insisted upon. "It's fine. Quiet." "Did he give you the rules?" Miguel's grin was wide, conspiratorial. "The fucking rules, man. Don't look at mirrors, don't talk to customers who don't drip water." Like we're in some creepypasta. The casual dismissal in his tone made something in my chest tighten. "You've read them?" "Everyone has. It's like an initiation thing. Han's been doing it for years, tries to freak out new people, makes the night shift feel special or whatever." He pulled out his phone, checked something, then looked back at me. "This place is creepy because it's retail in the middle of nowhere, and retail makes everyone lose their minds eventually. People make up stories so they don't have to admit it's just boring. I thought about the woman who hadn't tracked water, who'd been invisible to the cameras. I didn't mention her. You think they're just stories? I asked instead. I think Han needs a hobby. Miguel pushed off the counter. Watch, I'll prove it. There's supposed to be something about the mirror in aisle 7, right? Some bullshit about not looking at it after 3 a.m.? Rule 7, I said quietly. Right. So at 3 a.m., I'm going to stand right under that mirror and stare at it until something happens, which will be nothing. And then maybe we can all stop pretending this place is special. The certainty in his voice reminded me of how I'd felt during my training shift, before I'd learned that the rules described real phenomena. I wanted to warn him, but I also couldn't articulate what the warning would be based on. I'd followed the rules and avoided consequences. I hadn't tested them. You really don't need to do that, I said. Miguel laughed. You already believe the hype. That's sad, man. It's been what, 2 nights? He wandered back toward the front registers, leaving me with the Z-packs and a growing sense of unease. The next few hours passed in routine tasks. Dr. Han remained in the back room working through what he'd called quarterly inventory reconciliation, which apparently required spreadsheets and profound silence. I filled prescriptions from the overnight queue, counseled a tired-looking woman on antibiotic interactions, and tried not to watch the clock. But I did watch it. At 2:50 a.m., Miguel appeared at the pharmacy counter again. 10 minutes, he announced. You want to come watch? I'd feel better having a witness when nothing happens. I'm good here, I said. Suit yourself. He headed toward the back of the store, toward aisle 7. I pulled up the security monitors, finding the angle that covered aisles 7 and 9. Aisle 7 was the cold and flu section, shelves packed with NyQuil and Sudafed and vitamin C supplements that promised immune support. At the far end, mounted in the corner where the aisle met the back wall, was a convex security mirror, one of those dome-shaped mirrors that provided a wide-angle view to catch shoplifters. Miguel positioned himself directly beneath it, checking his phone for the time. On the monitor, I could see him clearly, tall, lean, wearing the store's red polo shirt, looking up at the mirror with that same confident grin. The clock above the pharmacy counter ticked over to 3 a.m. For the first 30 seconds, nothing happened. Miguel stood there, staring up at his own reflection in the convex surface, deliberately holding the pose. On my monitor, he appeared completely normal, a young man participating in a self-imposed dare, proving a point to no one in particular. Then at 3:01 a.m., something changed. It was subtle at first, the kind of thing you'd second-guess, attribute to video compression or tired eyes. Miguel's reflection in the convex mirror, visible on the monitor as a small, distorted image, seemed to move a fraction of a second slower than Miguel himself. When he shifted his weight, the reflection lagged, like video buffering. Miguel noticed it too. I saw him freeze, the grin fading. He leaned forward, peering more closely at the mirror. In the reflection, I could see his face, distorted by the convex surface but recognizable. His lips were moving. But Miguel's actual mouth, the one I could see on his body via the camera, was closed. The reflection was speaking. To someone. Something just outside the mirror's frame. I grabbed the intercom handset, jabbing the button for the overhead system. Miguel, step away from the mirror. My voice echoed through the store, tinny and desperate. On the monitor, Miguel jerked as I'd physically touched him, but he didn't step back. Instead, he leaned closer to the mirror, close enough that his breath would have fogged the surface if it had been flat glass. The reflection in the mirror moved forward too, but it moved farther than Miguel's body did. The reflection took an additional step, closing the distance that Miguel hadn't physically crossed. Now the reflected face was pressed against the inside curve of the convex mirror, nose flattened slightly, eyes wider than they should be. Those eyes were wrong. Not different in color or expression, but in proportion, set just slightly too far apart, the space between them a fraction too wide, as though someone had been asked to draw Miguel from memory and gotten the measurements almost right, but not quite. And the reflection smiled. Miguel's actual face didn't. His face had gone slack with something I recognized from my own mirror checks after bad nights. The expression of someone confronting an impossibility and trying to integrate it into their understanding of reality. Miguel! I abandoned the intercom and ran toward aisle 7, my footsteps thundering in the empty store. When I rounded the corner, Miguel was stumbling backward, away from the mirror, his hands up in a warding gesture. His eyes were locked on the convex surface, and whatever he saw there had leached the confidence from him completely. "Did you see?" he started, his voice hoarse. "Don't look at it again," I said, grabbing his arm and pulling him toward the front of the store. He didn't resist. Let me guide him like a child, his neck rigid as though forcing himself not to turn back. We made it to the front registers. I pushed him into the plastic chair behind the counter, the one for cashiers during slow periods. Miguel sat heavily, his hands shaking. "It moved wrong," he whispered. "My reflection. It moved when I wasn't moving. And its mouth, it was saying something. I could see it forming words, but I couldn't hear them through the glass, and I wanted to get closer so I could hear what it was saying. You didn't, though," I said firmly. "You stepped back. Only because you called me." He looked up at me, and his eyes had a hollowness that I recognized from Dr. Hahn's expression. "If you hadn't called me, I would have touched the mirror. I was about to. I wanted to." I didn't know what to say to that. The rule had been explicit. Don't look directly into the mirror after 3 a.m. It hadn't explained why. Now I understood that why might involve something that invited closer inspection, that pulled you in with your own face, your own voice, speaking just quietly enough that you'd need to press closer to hear. "Go home," I told Miguel. "Clock out. Tell Han you felt sick." "I can't drive," he said. I feel like there's someone behind me, like someone standing just over my shoulder, and if I turn around too fast, I'll see them, but if I don't turn around, they'll touch me." The fear in his voice was too specific to be generic paranoia. I glanced behind him automatically. Empty checkout lane, fluorescent lights, nothing. But the fact that I'd looked confirmed that some part of me believed him. I paged Dr. Hahn. He emerged from the back room with the resigned efficiency of someone who'd responded to similar pages before. He listened to my abbreviated explanation. Miguel looked at the aisle 7 mirror after 3 and simply nodded. "Go home, Miguel," Dr. Hahn said, his voice gentle in a way I hadn't heard before. "Call someone to pick you up. Don't drive if you feel disoriented." Miguel did call someone, his roommate, who arrived 20 minutes later, looking annoyed until he saw Miguel's face. They left together, Miguel walking with his shoulders hunched, hands shoved deep in his pockets. Dr. Hahn and I watched them go. Then he turned to me. "You tried to warn him?" "Yes, he didn't believe me. They usually don't." Dr. Hahn returned to the pharmacy bay and I followed. He pulled out the laminated rules, tapping Rule 7. "The mirror shows you something possible. A version of yourself that made different choices exists in a slightly different configuration. Most people find it compelling. They want to understand how it diverged, what it knows that they don't. What happens if they touch it?" Dr. Hahn was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know for certain. The last person who didn't show up for their next shift, when the police did a welfare check, they found them sitting in their apartment staring at a wall. Non-responsive. They were hospitalized for psychiatric evaluation. Do they recover? I'm told they were discharged after 3 weeks. They reported feeling like they were in the wrong place, that they'd made a wrong turn somewhere and ended up in the incorrect version of their life. They moved to California shortly after. He slid the rules back under the register. Miguel will probably be fine. He didn't touch the surface. He'll feel watched for a few days, but it should fade. Should. Dr. Hahn didn't answer that. Miguel didn't show up for his next scheduled shift, or the one after that. When I finally worked up the nerve to ask Rita about him, she said he'd been in a car accident, walked into traffic near the community college, didn't seem to see the cars. He was alive, hospitalized with a broken leg and concussion, but his roommate had told Rita that Miguel kept insisting the accident wasn't real, that he was still standing in aisle 7, still looking at the mirror, and everything since was something the reflection was showing him. I stopped asking about Miguel after that, but I memorized every rule on that laminated sheet and I didn't test any of them, not intentionally. It was during my 6th overnight shift that I started actively investigating. The job had settled into a rhythm: arrive at 4 p.m., train with Rita or one of the other day techs until the evening rush cleared, transition to Dr. Hahn's quiet presence, and the empty hours where the store became something else. I'd learned to recognize the patterns, which customers were real, wet footprints visible on cameras, purchased items, which rules applied to which hours, how to move through the space without inviting attention from things that weren't quite customers. But I hadn't learned why. The rules described behaviors without explaining their origins. They were reactive rather than preventive, suggesting that whatever existed here had been present long enough for protocols to develop organically, refined through repetition and consequence. I wanted to understand what we were managing. What had made this place into something that required rules for survival? The opportunity came during a 3 a.m. lull after Dr. Hahn had retreated to the back room for what he called quality assurance documentation, a task that apparently required privacy and took at least an hour. The pharmacy bay was empty except for me and the humming refrigeration units, and the fluorescent lights that never quite let darkness settle. I started with the obvious, the pharmacy's back room. It was small, cluttered in the way that pharmacy back rooms universally are. Boxes of supplies stacked against walls, outdated signage for flu shot campaigns, a folding table that served as break area with a microwave and coffee maker that had been old when I was born. A computer terminal sat in the corner, ancient and running software that probably hadn't been updated in a decade. Filing cabinets lined one wall, labeled by year and category. I started with the cabinets, working backward from the current year. Most of it was mundane: insurance paperwork, inventory logs, incident reports of the normal variety. Customer fell in the parking lot. Pharmacist miscounted Percocet and had to file a DEA report. But as I moved further back, the incident reports began to change. 2018. Customer complaint. Claims to have seen an extra aisle in pharmacy mirrors. No such aisle exists. The customer became agitated when unable to locate it again. 2016. Unexplainable motion detected on camera footage between 3 and 4 a.m. in aisle 7 cold flu section. No customers or staff present. Footage reviewed, archived. 2014. Tech reports fridge door in aisle 6 opening and closing repeatedly between 2 and 2:30 a.m. No customers visible on camera during incidents. Maintenance found no mechanical issues. The reports were written in the flat bureaucratic language of people trying to document impossible things in corporate-approved terminology. They didn't say ghost or entity. They said unexplainable motion and customer complaint. But the pattern was clear. This had been happening for years, and management's response had been to file reports and develop rules rather than investigate or address. I kept digging. Further back, past 2010, the filing system became less organized. Reports mixed with what looked like personal notes from previous pharmacy managers. That's where I found the notebook. It was spiral-bound, college-ruled, the cover water-stained and partially torn. Someone had written "Night Incidents," Evergreen RX in faded Sharpie on the front. I pulled it out carefully, half expecting it to disintegrate. The first entry was dated March 2003. Third week as overnight lead. Keep receiving faxed scripts from Evergreen Ward with prescriber listed as attending physician, no specific name. Called the number on the script, line disconnected. Checked with regional, no such account in the system. Scripts keep coming. Paper feels warm to the touch, even straight from the fax machine. I flipped forward. The notebook contained entries from multiple people, different handwriting styles, spanning what looked like 15 years. Some entries were clinical observations, others veered into obvious fear. The woman in the hospital gown came again. 2:22 a.m. exactly. I spoke to her this time and asked if she needed help. She turned to look at me and her eyes were wrong, too dark, like the pupils had expanded to fill the entire eye. She opened her mouth, and I could see down her throat, and there was nothing there, just darkness that kept going. I ran to the back room and locked the door. When I came back out 10 minutes later, she was gone. Every bottle of aspirin in aisle 2 had been turned upside down. Took me an hour to fix them. No date, different handwriting than previous entries. Manager says we're built on the old hospital grounds. I looked it up at the library. Evergreen Ward was a long-term care facility, part of the hospital that burned in 1974. Fire started in room 12 and spread fast. Some patients couldn't be evacuated in time. The ward was never rebuilt. This pharmacy sits where the East Wing used to be, dated 2006. Rule about aisle 7 mirror works. Tested it, don't test it, don't look. Whatever you see in there wants to be seen. Dated 2009, the handwriting shaky. If you fill your own prescription before you've entered it into the system yourself, something is wrong. Void it. Void it immediately. Last month, I almost filled one. The label already had my name printed on it when I walked in for a shift. The paper was warm. I voided it and left the building. Next day, fine. Don't fill your own. 2012. I sat on the folding chair, notebook open on my lap, and felt the last of my skepticism drain away. This wasn't isolated incidents or confused customers. This was institutional knowledge accumulated over decades by people who'd worked these same hours in this same space and learned the same terrible lessons. We were built on top of something that had never stopped operating. I photographed several pages of the notebook with my phone, then kept searching. In the back of a different filing cabinet, I found photocopies of newspaper articles bundled together with a rusty paper clip. Fire destroys Evergreen Medical Ward. Evergreen Falls Gazette, October 15, 1974. A devastating fire swept through the eastern wing of Evergreen Falls Community Hospital last night, destroying the long-term care facility known as Evergreen Ward and claiming at least 12 lives. The fire, which started around 11:40 p.m. in room 12, spread rapidly through the aging structure despite the efforts of firefighters who arrived within minutes of the alarm. Hospital Administrator Patricia Voss told reporters that several patients in the ward were unable to be evacuated due to mobility issues and the speed of the fire's spread. "We lost good people tonight," Voss said. "People who'd been with us for years who couldn't get out in time. Investigators are looking into the cause of the fire, though preliminary reports suggest an electrical malfunction in room 12. The wing will not be rebuilt, according to hospital board chairman." The article continued, but I'd stopped reading at the name. Patricia Voss. I'd seen that name recently. It took me a moment to place it, my first solo prescription filled during training. The tired woman who'd welcomed me to town. I checked the article date again, 1974. If Patricia Voss had been a hospital administrator then, she'd be in her 70s at minimum by now. The woman who'd picked up the Z-Pack had been in her 50s at most. Maybe it was a coincidence. A common name in a small town, family connections, Second generation with the same name. Maybe. I kept reading. Another article from 1975 described the hospital's decision to sell the land where Evergreen Ward had stood, citing reconstruction costs and changes in long-term care regulations. A 1982 article mentioned commercial development on the site. A strip mall that had included a grocery store, a video rental place, and a pharmacy. That original pharmacy had apparently closed in the mid-90s when the building changed hands. Evergreen RX was built on the same footprint in 1998. 24 years of continuous pharmacy operation on land where people had burned to death in what was supposed to be a place of healing. I thought about Rule 5, never under any circumstances fill a prescription written for room 12 after midnight. We do not serve that ward. The ward was gone, had been gone for 50 years, but something persisted. Something that still generated prescriptions, still expected service, still made rounds through aisles that existed in a configuration that no longer matched physical reality. "Find what you were looking for?" I jumped, nearly dropping the notebook. Dr. Hahn stood in the doorway, holding his travel mug, expression unreadable. "I'm sorry," I said automatically. "I was just curious." He moved into the break room, settling into the other folding chair with a small sigh. "It's natural. Everyone looks eventually." He nodded at the notebook. "That's been passed down since before I started here. Each overnight tech adds to it or doesn't. Your choice. How long have you worked here?" 12 years. He sipped his tea. "I was night shift for the first 8 years, took over as a full-time overnight pharmacist 4 years ago when my predecessor retired. Or quit. The distinction was never entirely clear. Why do you stay?" Dr. Hahn was quiet for a moment, looking at the break room's fluorescent lights. "Where else would I go? This is what I know now. And someone needs to maintain the protocols. If everyone who learned the rules left, eventually you'd get a night shift with no institutional knowledge, no guidance. They'd learn through consequence rather than prevention. Like Miguel, I thought. Like probably dozens of others over the years." "What is this place?" I asked. "What are we actually dealing with?" "Continuation," Dr. Hahn said. "The ward burned, but the routines didn't stop. The patients who died there, some of them had been residents for years, following the same daily patterns. Medication rounds at specific times, meals and bathing schedules. When you do something the same way for long enough, it wears a groove into reality. And when the people cease to exist but the place remains," he gestured vaguely at the store around us, "the grooves persist, the routines continue. So the woman in the hospital, gown, is making her 2 a.m. rounds probably. The mirror shows someone who looked into it once and got trapped in reflection. The prescriptions from room 12 are medication orders that were submitted so many times they became permanent requests." He set down his tea. "This store exists in 2 configurations simultaneously. The pharmacy we work in and the ward that still believes it's operating. Between midnight and dawn, when the boundary is thinnest, both configurations are partially present. That's impossible." "Yes," Dr. Hahn agreed. "It is. But you've seen it. You'll see more, and you'll either learn to navigate it through the rules or you won't last." I looked down at the notebook, at the accumulated observations of people who'd stood exactly where I was standing, processing exactly what I was processing. Has anyone ever tried to fix it, end it somehow? "How would you end a routine?" Dr. Hahn asked. "How do you stop something that doesn't know it's supposed to have stopped?" He stood, collecting his tea mug. "The rules aren't about fixing anything, Jordan. They're about coexistence. We work here. They continue their patterns. As long as we don't disrupt their routines and they don't disrupt ours, everyone survives." He paused at the doorway. You can add to the notebook if you experience something new. Or you can just follow the rules. Both choices are valid. Then he was gone, leaving me with the documented history of this place and the growing certainty that I was now part of that history. Another name in an unwritten list of people who'd learned to navigate the overlap between what was and what refused to stop being. I returned the newspaper articles to their cabinet, but I kept the notebook out, setting it carefully on the break room table. Before the shift ended, I found a pen and added my own entry. Jordan Malik, Night Tech, October 2024, confirmed Rule 3 and Rule 7, both accurate. Woman at 2:16 a.m., no footprints invisible to cameras. Mirror in aisle 7 after 3 a.m. shows a wrong reflection that moves independently. Miguel Torres tested Rule 7. Didn't touch the mirror but suffered lasting psychological effects. Rules work. Don't test them. I dated it, closed the notebook, and left it where the next person would find it. When I drove home that morning, the sun was trying to break through the cloud cover, turning everything golden and normal. But I couldn't shake the image of the pharmacy at night, lights humming, routines continuing in 2 time frames at once. One visible, one sensed only through absence and anomaly. I had 4 more shifts that week. I was starting to understand that each one would teach me something new. By the end of my second week, I'd developed a relationship with the rules that went beyond simple adherence. I'd memorized them completely, all 12, not just the highlighted ones, and begun to recognize the patterns they described before the rules themselves became necessary. The slight static charge in the air between 2:10 and 2:30 a.m., the way shadows in aisle 7 seemed marginally darker after 2:45 a.m., thickening toward the 3 a.m. threshold. The faint smell of antiseptic that had no source, appearing and disappearing like a sense memory made environmental. But memorization wasn't understanding, and adherence wasn't comfort. I still spent my shifts with a low-level anxiety that spiked every time something moved in my peripheral vision. Every time the automatic doors opened for no visible reason. Every time the printer activated without input and spat out labels that hadn't been generated. I needed context, origin, some framework for understanding what I was navigating. So on a Thursday night during the dead zone of 4 a.m., when even the persistent strangeness seemed to ebb slightly, I cornered Dr. Han in the break room. He was sitting with his eternal tea, reading what looked like a pharmaceutical journal but might have been anything. I'd learned that Dr. Han used reading material as a privacy shield, a polite signal that he was present but not available. I ignored the signal. "I need to understand what happened here," I said, sliding into the chair across from him. "Not the rules. I know those. I need to know why the rules exist in this specific form. Why these particular phenomena, these particular times, these particular responses." Dr. Han looked up from his journal with that characteristic expression of tired resignation. He was quiet for long enough that I thought he might simply refuse. Then he closed the journal, a pharmacy trade publication actually, and folded his hands on the table. "You've been reading the incident notebook," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, and the newspaper archives. The fire was in 1974. This building was constructed in 1998. That's a 24-year gap, but the articles only mention one interim commercial building that was eventually torn down." "What happened during those years? Was the land empty?" "No." Dr. Han sipped his tea. "The original structure was cleared by 1976. The land sat vacant for 2 years while the city debated zoning, medical facility versus commercial development. Commercial won. The first plaza was built in 1978, a grocery store, a pharmacy, a video rental, insurance office. Standard strip mall configuration. And the grocery store closed in 1985 after repeated complaints about cold spots, items moving overnight, customers reporting figures in the aisles that looked like staff but didn't respond to questions. The insurance office lasted until 1989. The video rental place made it to 1991. The pharmacy, original Evergreen RX, different ownership, stayed operational until 1994, but they only ran day shifts. Wouldn't staff overnight. What happened when the building was empty at night? Dr. Han's expression suggested I'd ask the relevant question. Police responded to alarm triggers 20 to 30 times a month. Motion sensors, door sensors, and glass break detectors. Every response found the building secure, no signs of entry. The security company finally refused to continue service. Said their system was fine, but something about the building created false positives. He paused. They weren't false positives. The routines were continuing. Yes. Without living people to interact with, the patterns simply ran in their absence. Doors that should open at specific times for specific purposes opened. Motion occurred where patients would have walked. The building itself became a stage where the same play was performed nightly to an empty house. I thought about the woman in the hospital gown, the way she'd moved through the aisles with purpose but without engagement. So when the current Evergreen RX was built, they built on the exact footprint of the old ward. The architect apparently used the original hospital blueprints as reference for the foundation, trying to minimize construction costs, which meant the new pharmacy's layout partially aligned with the old ward's structure. Dr. Han pulled out his phone, scrolled to a photo, and turned it toward me. It was two blueprints overlaid on each other, one in blue, one in red. The red, labeled Evergreen Ward East Wing 1974, showed a long corridor with rooms branching off, a nurse's station, a medication room. The blue, Evergreen RX Ground Floor 1998, showed the familiar pharmacy layout. Where room 12 had been on the ward map, the pharmacy's aisle 7 now stood. Jesus, I whispered. The overlap isn't perfect, Dr. Han continued, zooming in on the image, but it's close enough that certain correspondences developed. The pharmacy counter sits approximately where the nurse's station was. Our back room is built over the old medication dispensary. The side door leads to the alley, but in the ward configuration, that door led to a secured area where they kept patients who were experiencing psychiatric crises. And at night, both configurations exist simultaneously in diminished form. The pharmacy is physically present, dominant, but the ward's routines persist as echo, as pattern, strong enough to manifest partially. The patients make their rounds, the staff perform their duties, medications are requested, and if you're here during those hours, you're existing in the overlap, perceiving both states at once. I stared at the overlaid blueprints. It was one thing to know abstractly that the land had history. It was another to see the architectural confirmation that we'd literally built a pharmacy on top of an active haunting, that the store's layout had inadvertently created perfect conditions for past and present to bleed together. The rules, I said slowly. They're not about stopping the ward. They're about making sure the two operations don't interfere with each other. Correct. Rule 3 exists because the woman making her 2 a.m. rounds needs to complete that routine. If you engage with her, you're inserting yourself into the ward's timeline, becoming part of her routine. She'll expect you to behave like ward staff, to take her blood pressure, adjust her medication, and respond to her needs. But you can't do that because you don't exist in her timeline properly. The mismatch creates confusion, distress, and the boundary between configurations destabilizes. What happens when it destabilizes? Dr. Han was quiet for a long moment. I've only seen it once, about 7 years ago. A tech didn't follow Rule 3, tried to help the woman and asked her detailed questions. The woman became agitated, insisting she needed her medication from room 8. The tech tried to explain that there was no room 8, that this was a pharmacy. The woman started screaming. and for about 30 seconds the entire store shifted. Shifted how? The aisles weren't aisles anymore. They were hospital corridors. The shelving became patient room doors. The fluorescent lights were dimmer, yellowed, the kind of lighting from the 70s. I could hear other patients, other voices calling out for help. The tech was standing in what looked like a nurse's station, and the woman was real, solid, physical, her hospital bracelet legible. Then it snapped back. Store configuration, regular aisles, no voices, but the tech was different afterward. Said she could still hear the voices sometimes, especially at night. She quit within a month. A cold understanding settled into my chest. We're not haunting observers, we're participants. If we break the rules, we risk getting pulled fully into their configuration. Yes, Dr. Han finished his tea. The rules maintain separation. They let both operations continue in parallel without collision. That's why they're so specific. They're based on observed patterns, times when the ward's routine intersects most strongly with the pharmacy's space. Follow them, and you navigate the overlap safely. Break them, and you risk becoming part of what you're trying to avoid. I thought about Miguel, about the reflection in the mirror that had spoken to him. Rule 7. The mirror in aisle 7. That's room 12's location in the ward layout. Yes, room 12 was where the fire started. The patient in that room, psychiatric hold, long-term resident, apparently had a mirror in his room against protocol. When the fire spread, he was found facing the mirror. Some of the ward staff who survived said he'd spent hours every day staring at it, talking to his reflection. They'd tried to remove it, but he became violent. Dr. Han's expression darkened. What's in that mirror now isn't reflection. It's whatever he was talking to, and it's still looking for conversation. The rule says don't look directly after 3 a.m. What happens before 3? Before 3, it's just a mirror. After 3, the ward's configuration is strong enough that the mirror becomes what it was, a doorway into something that presents as reflection but isn't. Miguel learned that. I remembered Miguel's description, the reflection moving independently, mouth forming words, the overwhelming desire to get closer. It invites engagement. Yes, and if you touch the mirror, you complete a connection that was interrupted by the fire. You become the person it was trying to communicate with 50 years ago. I don't know exactly what that means long term, but I know the last person who touched it stopped recognizing themselves. They kept insisting they were in the wrong body, living the wrong life. The implications made my skin crawl. Are there other rules I should know about? Ones that aren't written down? Dr. Han considered this. 1. It's not written because it's rare, hasn't happened in my tenure, but the notebook mentions it. If you ever pick up the pharmacy phone for a counseling call and hear yourself speaking on the other end, your own voice, answering as though you're the patient, hang up immediately. Don't speak to it. Don't try to rationalize it. What is it? Temporal loop. The ward's timeline and the pharmacy's timeline occasionally create closed causal loops where an event causes itself. If you speak to yourself, you risk creating a paradox that traps you in repeating the same conversation infinitely, or at least until the sun comes up and the ward's configuration weakens. He stood collecting his mug. It's rare, but possible. So if the phone rings and you hear yourself, just hang up. He moved toward the door, then paused. You're doing well, Jordan. Better than most. You take the rules seriously without letting the fear paralyze you. That balance is difficult to maintain. How do you maintain it? I asked. 12 years of this. How do you keep coming back? Dr. Han looked back at me, and for the first time I saw something other than resignation in his expression. A kind of grim determination, or perhaps obligation. Because someone has to. If everyone who learned the rules left, eventually you'd staff this place with people who had no idea what they were navigating. They'd break rules through ignorance. They'd suffer consequences that weren't their fault. By staying, I reduced that suffering. He paused. And because leaving would mean admitting I wasted 12 years learning to coexist with something impossible, I'd rather it mean something. After he left, I sat in the break room for another 10 minutes processing. The conversation had provided context, but not comfort. If anything, understanding the mechanism made it worse, knowing that I was working in a space where two time frames overlapped, where my actions could pull me into a configuration that had ended 50 years ago, where the routines of the dead continued with or without living participants. But Dr. Hahn had been right about one thing. Someone needed to maintain the protocols. And now that I understood what they were preventing, I couldn't imagine staffing the overnight shift with someone unaware. I returned to the pharmacy bay and pulled up the overnight schedule. My name appeared 3 nights a week for the foreseeable future. I didn't request a transfer to the day shift. I'm not sure I could explain why, even to myself. Perhaps it was the same obligation Dr. Hahn felt. Perhaps it was the arrogance of believing I could handle what others couldn't. Or perhaps it was simply that the rules worked, and following them gave me a framework for navigating impossibility. Whatever the reason, I showed up for my next shift with the rules memorized and a new entry in the incident notebook. Confirmed with Dr. Hahn. Building sites on Evergreen Ward footprint. Architectural overlap creates configuration bleed between the pharmacy and the defunct hospital ward. Rules exist to prevent timeline collision. Engagement with ward phenomena risks pulling living persons into ward configuration. Dr. Hahn has maintained protocols for 12 years. I'm staying on. I dated it, closed the notebook, and returned to the counter. The night continued its routines, both seen and unseen, and I navigated them with careful adherence to rules I now understood weren't about survival. They were about maintaining the boundary between what is and what insists on continuing to be. It happened during my 18th night shift at 12:42 a.m., when I was processing the overnight prescription queue in the comfortable routine I'd developed. Check insurance, verify dosage, pull stock bottle, count pills, print label. The rhythm had become meditative, almost soothing in its predictability. The store was empty. Dr. Hahn was in the back room. Rain whispered against the windows. Everything was normal. Then the computer chimed. New e-prescription received. I pulled it up automatically, already reaching for the stock bottle I'd need, already running through insurance verification steps. Then I saw the prescriber field. Prescriber, Evergreen Ward. Attending physician, no name. No DEA number, no NPI. Just Evergreen Ward and a title. I stared at it, my hand frozen halfway to the keyboard. The patient name field made my blood run cold. Patient. Malik Jordan. My name. My full name spelled correctly. No errors. But I hadn't been to a doctor since moving to Evergreen Falls. I had no prescriptions pending. I certainly hadn't submitted anything to be filled out tonight. The medication field showed a high-dose sedative, lorazepam 10 mg, quantity 60, with directions that made my skin crawl. Directions. Take as directed for prolonged exposure to abnormal stimuli. Do not discontinue abruptly. The prescription had been submitted at 12:40 a.m., 2 minutes ago. The prescriber's signature was a scrawled line that could have been anything. The paper trail, usually showing which medical record system or pharmacy network had transmitted the script, was blank, as though the prescription had materialized directly in our system without technological intermediation. I sat there, hands shaking, reading and rereading the details. The note I'd read in the incident notebook came back with perfect clarity. If the name on the prescription label already matches your own before you print it, void it. Do not fill your own. This was that. Exactly that. A prescription with my name, arriving without my knowledge, originating from a place that didn't exist. I moved to void it, hit the reject button, entered patient error as the reason code, confirmed the void. The prescription disappeared from the active queue. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt watched. The printer hummed to life. I looked down at the label printer just as it began feeding paper, the thermal printing mechanism activating without input. A label emerged, perfectly formatted. Malik, Jordan Lorazepam 10 mm. Take as directed for prolonged exposure to abnormal stimuli, QD 60. Prescriber, Evergreen Ward, attending physician. The same prescription, printed despite being voided. The paper felt warm under my fingers, almost fever-hot, and when I flipped it over, I saw faint text on the blank side, as though someone had written on a sheet underneath when this was being printed. You've been exposed for 18 days. The sedative will help. Room 12 always helps its staff. I dropped the label like it was burning me. It drifted to the floor, landing face up, my name perfectly legible under the fluorescent lights. The computer chimed again. I looked at the screen with growing dread. New prescription, same patient, same medication, same impossible prescriber. This time the quantity was 90 tablets. The directions had changed. Directions: take immediately. Prolonged exposure without treatment causes a permanent configuration shift. My hands moved to void it again, but I hesitated. Configuration shift. That's what Dr. Han had described. The risk of getting pulled into the ward's timeline, of becoming part of what I was trying to avoid. Was this a warning? Was something in the ward's echo recognizing my presence and trying to help in the only way it knew how? Or was it trying to pull me in by presenting help as medication? I voided the second prescription. The printer hummed again immediately. Another label, this time with quantity 120, directions reading: take immediately. You cannot refuse treatment indefinitely. I ripped the label from the printer and crumpled it, throwing it in the HIPAA trash bin under the counter. Void, print, void, print. This could continue all night if I let it. The system was caught in some kind of loop, or something was using the system to insist on filling this prescription. The overhead speakers crackled. No announcement came through, just static, but underneath I could hear something. Voices, maybe distant and overlapping like a hospital PA system from another room. One voice seemed closer than the others, male, tired. Nurses station, this is room 12. Patient Malik hasn't received his 8 p.m. medication. Please verify order and deliver to room. I grabbed the intercom handset and jabbed the button that paged Dr. Han. I need you in the pharmacy bay now. He emerged from the back room within 30 seconds, moving faster than I'd ever seen him move. He took one look at my face, then at the computer screen where a third iteration of the prescription had just appeared, and his expression hardened. How many times has it submitted? 3 voided. This is the 4th. Don't fill it. He moved to the terminal, reading the details. His jaw tightened when he saw the patient name. It's targeting you specifically, that's new. New how? The notebook said. The notebook described prescriptions that were already filled before tech saw them, prescriptions that somehow knew what the tech would order for themselves. This is different. This is generating your prescription before you've requested it, before you've even acknowledged needing it. He looked at me sharply. Have you broken any rules in the past week? No, I've followed everything exactly. Engaged with any customers who seemed unusual? No. Dr. Han was quiet, thinking. The overhead speakers crackled again, that distant voice repeating, Patient Malik, room 12. Medication delayed. Please confirm receipt of order. It thinks you're a patient, Dr. Han said slowly. Somehow it's categorized you as ward population rather than staff. That shouldn't be possible unless... He trailed off, looking at me with something like concern. Have you been having trouble sleeping? Vivid dreams? Sense of dislocation when you wake up? I had, actually. Dreams where I was walking the pharmacy aisles, but they stretched into hospital corridors, where my name tag said patient instead of tech, where Dr. Han wore a ward nurse's uniform and called me by room number instead of name. I'd attributed it to stress, to working nights, to normal nightmare logic. "You're integrating," Dr. Han said quietly. "The longer you work here, the more you're present during the overlap, the more the ward's configuration recognizes you as part of its routine. It's trying to assign you a role. If you fill this prescription, you're accepting that role. You become patient Malik, room 12, under treatment for psychological distress caused by exposure to abnormal stimuli. What happens if I become that? I don't know. No one who's filled their own name has come back to document the outcome." The computer chimed. "Fifth prescription, same. Details." The quantity had increased to 180 tablets, a 6-month supply. The directions now read, "Take as directed. Continued refusal will result in involuntary admission for treatment." My hands felt numb. How do I stop this? Dr. Han moved to the terminal and did something I couldn't see. Some key combination or system access I didn't have. The prescription queue flickered and all 5 iterations of my name disappeared simultaneously. The printer fell silent. "Emergency purge," he said. "Wipes the system cache completely, forces a reboot. We'll lose any pending prescriptions that were legitimately submitted in the past hour, but it breaks whatever loop is generating these." He looked at the printer, at the crumpled labels in the trash, at me. "You can't be here for the rest of tonight." What? If the ward has started generating prescriptions for you specifically, it means the boundary is thinned enough that it's treating you as a patient. Continuing to work tonight risks reinforcing that categorization. Go home. Come back tomorrow at your regular shift time. The daylight hours will reset the configuration. I can't just leave you. I've handled shifts alone before. Go. There was no room for argument in his tone. I grabbed my jacket, my keys, and left through the front entrance, the automatic doors hissing closed behind me with an air of finality. In my car, I sat for a full minute before starting the engine, staring at the pharmacy's glowing sign. Through the windows, I could see Dr. Han moving through the pharmacy bay, methodically checking something. He looked small in there, solitary, the only living person navigating an overlap that wanted to assign everyone a role. I drove home through rain that felt too warm, through streets that seemed slightly unfamiliar even though I'd driven this route dozens of times. When I got to my apartment and checked my phone, I had a text from an unknown number, time-stamped 12:58 a.m. "Room 12 continues care whether you attend or not. The prescription will be ready when you return. Evergreen Ward." I deleted it. Then I checked my deleted messages to confirm I'd actually received it, that I hadn't imagined it. The message was there, complete with timestamp. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my couch as dawn came up, watching the way shadows retreated as sunlight, pale and filtered through cloud cover, reclaimed the world. In daylight, everything felt distant, manageable. The text message looked like a prank. The prescription seemed like a system glitch. The whole night took on the quality of nightmare rather than memory. But I knew better. When I returned for my next shift the following evening, everything appeared normal. No prescription with my name, no warm labels, no voice on the speakers requesting medication for patient Malik. But Dr. Han pulled me aside before the day staff left and said quietly, "Check the system before you fill anything with your name on it, even if it comes through proper channels, even if it looks legitimate. Verify the prescriber is real. The submission timeline makes sense. The ward knows your name now. It will try again." "Has this happened to you?" I asked. "Once," he said, "about 3 years in. I didn't feel it same as you. But I had dreams for months afterward where I was a patient in room 8, and Dr. Han was the attending physician coming to check on me. In the dreams, I'd been there for years. I knew all the other patients, followed all the routines. When I woke up, I'd sometimes forget which version was real for a few seconds, whether I was pharmacist Han or patient Han. Did it stop? Eventually, but I'm still careful. He handed me a new laminated sheet, an updated version of the rules. At the bottom, written in fresh marker, Rule 13. If you receive a prescription with your own name from Evergreen Ward, void it immediately. Do not fill. Do not investigate. Leave the building and do not return until the next scheduled shift. I took the sheet, laminated it, and slid it under the register next to the original. The night continued. Routine returned. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd crossed some invisible threshold, that by simply being present long enough, by learning the rules and following them successfully, I'd made myself visible to something that had been observing all along. And now it knew my name. The confrontation came on my 23rd night shift, during the worst storm I'd experienced since moving to Evergreen Falls. The kind of Pacific Northwest deluge that turns highways into rivers and makes the forest press closer to human structures, as though the trees are trying to reclaim territory during the chaos. Rain hammered the pharmacy roof in waves, and wind made the windows flex in their frames. The power had flickered twice between midnight and 1 a.m., the emergency backup system whirring to life before grid power returned. Dr. Han had been unusually quiet during the first half of the shift, methodically working through inventory, but with a tension in his shoulders that I'd learned to recognize as anticipation. Something about the storm, the atmospheric pressure, the way rain obscured all the windows. It made the pharmacy feel more isolated than usual, cut off from the regular world. At 2:18 a.m., the automatic doors opened. I looked up from the prescription I was filling, antibiotics for a morning pickup, and felt my stomach drop. A man stood just inside the entrance, water streaming off a rain jacket that looked decades old, the kind of vinyl material that had gone out of style in the 80s. He was middle-aged, maybe 50, with the kind of institutional pallor that comes from prolonged fluorescent light exposure. On his left wrist, clearly visible as he lowered his hood, was a hospital bracelet, faded and yellowed. But the entrance mat was dry. Not just dry, pristine, as though the rain pounding the building exterior existed in a different weather system than the one this man had walked through. He approached the pharmacy counter with the determined gait of someone who'd made this walk before, many times. When he reached the glass partition, he pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket and slid it through the gap at the bottom of the glass. "It's for room 12, he said. His voice was flat, affectless, like someone reading from a script. "They've been waiting a long time." I didn't touch the paper. I could see from where I stood that it was a prescription form, handwritten, the paper textured in a way modern prescription pads aren't. Fibrous, almost like parchment. The paper was dry, but it steamed slightly in the air-conditioned pharmacy bay as though it had come from somewhere warmer. Rule 5. Never under any circumstances fill a prescription written for room 12 after midnight. We do not serve that ward. "I'm sorry," I said, keeping my voice level. "We can't fill that prescription here." The man's eyes, pale gray, watery, focused on me with uncomfortable intensity. "Room 12 needs their medication. It's been delayed for too long. The patient is in distress. We don't service that room." I kept my hands visible, non-threatening, the way I'd learned to de-escalate agitated customers. "You'll need to take that prescription to a different pharmacy." "There is no different pharmacy." His tone didn't rise, didn't shift, maintained that flat recitation quality. "Evergreen Ward only has one dispensary, that's this counter. You're the night staff. It's your responsibility to fill ward prescriptions during overnight hours." He was describing the hospital layout. In the 1970s configuration, the pharmacy counter was the dispensary, and I was standing where the night nurse would have stood, responsible for medication distribution to the ward's patients. He wasn't wrong in his timeline, but I wasn't part of that timeline. "Sir, this is Evergreen RX Pharmacy, not Evergreen Ward. The ward closed in 1974. "No," he said simply. "The ward continues. It has always continued. You're confused. That happens sometimes with new night staff. Let me help you." He reached into his jacket again and pulled out a laminated ID badge, the kind staff wear on lanyards. He held it up to the glass. The badge read, "Evergreen Ward Medical Center, Night Supervisor, Marcus Webb." The photo showed the same man but younger, maybe 30, with a smile that suggested he'd once enjoyed his work. The badge had an expiration date, December 1974. "I've been here a long time," Marcus Webb said. "I can show you how to process Room 12 prescriptions. It's quite simple. You just need to access the ward formulary in the system." He gestured toward my computer terminal. "Pull up the patient file. Everything is there." I glanced at the terminal. The screen had gone dark, screensaver energy-saving mode, but when I moved the mouse to wake it, I saw the login screen had changed. Instead of the normal Evergreen RX portal, it showed, "Evergreen Ward Medical Center Medication Dispensary System, please enter staff credentials." My hands felt cold. The system had never shown this interface before. Either something had hijacked the terminal or the terminal was displaying both configurations at once. Pharmacy system and ward system overlaid. "Your username is already in the system," Marcus Webb said helpfully. "Just enter your credentials. The prescription will populate automatically." I looked past him through the glass partition into the store. On the security monitors above the counter, something was very wrong. Aisles 1 through 6 showed normally, shelving products, fluorescent lighting. But aisles 7 through 9, the section that corresponded with where Room 12 had been in the ward layout, showed something different. The shelving was gone. Instead, the monitors showed hospital corridor walls, painted that specific institutional green that hadn't been fashionable since the 70s. Closed doors lined the corridor, numbered, Room 8, Room 9, Room 10. At the end of the corridor, partially visible, was a door marked Room 12. And standing in front of that door, visible only in the monitor feed, were people. 3 of them wearing hospital gowns, standing motionlessly in the corridor as though waiting. When I looked directly at where aisles 7 and 9 should be, I saw only the regular pharmacy layout. But on the monitors showed the ward. "They're waiting," Marcus Webb said. "Room 12's patient has been waiting for medication for 50 years. That's a very long time to wait. It's causing distress. You can end the distress by filling the prescription." I looked down at the paper he'd slid under the glass. From this angle, I could see the patient name field. Patient. Staff. Night. Not a person's name. A role. The prescription was written for whoever occupied the night shift position, as though that position itself was the patient. The medication field showed lorazepam 10 mg on Q2 180 with PRN administration for acute distress and compliance issues. My brain caught on compliance issues, medical terminology for when patients refuse treatment. This prescription wasn't about healing. It was about sedating whoever filled it, ensuring compliance with the ward's routines. "I can't fill this," I said. "You must." For the first time, emotion entered Marcus Webb's voice, not anger, but something like distress or perhaps desperation. "Room 12 cannot continue without medication. The patient becomes unstable. The ward becomes unstable. If you refuse, protocol requires involuntary administration. I'm not part of your ward. Everyone in this building between midnight and 6 a.m. is part of the ward," Marcus Webb said. "The ward encompasses all who are present during operational hours. You've been present for 23 shifts. That's sufficient exposure for full integration. You are night staff. Room 12 requires your service. On the monitors, the figures in the corridor began to move. They walked in unison. Not toward the camera, but toward the end of the corridor, toward room 12's door. When they reached it, they turned to face the door, standing in a line, waiting. The door to room 12 began to open. I couldn't see what was inside. The camera angle didn't extend far enough. But the light that spilled from the doorway was wrong, too yellow, too thick, like light filtered through old glass or smoke. The figures in hospital gowns stood in that light, motionless. Then one of them turned to look directly at the camera. It was Miguel. I recognized him immediately, same height, same features, but wearing a hospital gown and bracelet, eyes unfocused in the specific way of heavily sedated patients. He raised one hand in a slow, wavering gesture that might have been greeting or warning. "Your colleague," Marcus Webb said, noticing my reaction. He looked into room 12's mirror. That establishes connection. He was retrieved 3 days after his accident. He's responding well to treatment. Miguel isn't here. He's in the hospital, recovering from injuries. Yes, Marcus Webb agreed. This hospital, Evergreen Ward, where he belongs now, where you'll belong once you fill the prescription. He leaned closer to the glass, and I saw that his eyes had the same unfocused quality as Miguel's, like he was looking at me from a great distance, or through water. It's not painful, night staff. The integration is quite gentle once you accept it. You'll simply continue your routine, and the routine will become all that matters. Time will stop being linear. You'll just exist in the moment of service again and again, perfectly. Every instinct screamed to run. But I'd learned enough to know that running might not help. The ward's configuration was already present, already overlapping. If I fled into the store, I'd be running through aisles that were simultaneously hospital corridors. The exit might lead to the parking lot, or it might lead to a ward lobby that hadn't existed in 50 years. I needed to break the pattern, force the configurations apart. I reached for the emergency power cutoff under the counter, a breaker switch that killed all non-essential electrical systems in the pharmacy bay. Dr. Hahn had shown it to me during training, explained it was for fire suppression scenarios, situations where you needed to immediately cut power to prevent equipment damage. I flipped the switch. Every light in the pharmacy bay went dark. The terminal screens went black. The label printer, pill counters, refrigeration units, everything went silent. Only the emergency lights remained, battery-powered LEDs that cast the space in dim red. In the sudden darkness, Marcus Webb's expression changed. The flat affect cracked, showing something underneath. Not anger, but confusion, like a program encountering input it couldn't process. "That's not protocol," he said. "You can't interrupt the dispensary during operational hours. Patients need medication." "There are no patients," I said. The ward burned. "You're describing routines that ended 50 years ago." "No." But his voice had lost certainty. "No, I just checked the schedule. I have rounds at 3. Room 12 needs... Room 12 is gone. You're gone. This is a pharmacy in 2024, and you're not supposed to be here." Marcus Webb looked down at his hands as though seeing them for the first time. In the red emergency lighting, I could see they were translucent at the edges, fingers fading into nothing, like a photograph losing contrast. "I don't understand," he whispered. "I came in for my shift at 11. I've been here since 11. I need to finish rounds." "Your shift ended in 1974, I said, gentler now. "You've been finishing it for 50 years, but there's no one left to check on. The patients are gone. You can stop." He looked up at me, and for just a moment his eyes cleared, focused, present, meeting mine with full awareness. "We couldn't get them out," he said. "The fire spread too fast. Room 12, room 10, room 8. We tried, but the doors jammed and the smoke..." His voice cracked. "I kept coming back every night, trying to complete the rounds, trying to get the medications delivered, trying to fix what went wrong. "You can't fix it," I said. "It's already happened. But you don't have to keep trying." Marcus Webb stood there in the red emergency light, prescription still clutched in one hand, looking at me with an expression of profound exhaustion. "How do I stop?" he asked. "How do I stop coming in for my shift?" I didn't have an answer. Dr. Han might, but Dr. Han was in the back room, probably already aware of what was happening, but giving me space to navigate it. The ward's echo was maintained by routine, by patterns repeated until they became permanent. Breaking the pattern required what? Acknowledgement, permission, releasing the obligation? "You did everything you could," I said. "You tried to help them. You kept coming back, kept trying to complete your duties. That's enough. You don't have to keep trying anymore." Marcus Webb looked at the prescription in his hand, the paper that had seemed solid, real, warm. As I watched, it began to fade, becoming transparent, the writing illegible. He stared at it as it dissolved completely, leaving him holding nothing. "I'm very tired," he said quietly. "I know. I'd like to go home." "You can. The exit is behind you." He turned slowly, looking toward the automatic doors. In the red, emergency light, I could see his form was becoming less solid, edges blurring. He took a step toward the exit, then paused and looked back at me. "Tell the day staff that room 12's patient needs monitoring," he said. "They get agitated when left alone too long." Before I could respond, he turned back to the exit and walked through the closed automatic doors. Not opening them, just passing through the glass like it wasn't there. In the parking lot beyond, visible through the rain-streaked windows, he took 3 more steps and then simply wasn't anymore. No dramatic disappearance, no fade out, just presence, then absence. I stood there in the red emergency light, breathing hard, for a full minute before reaching under the counter and flipping the power back on. The lights hummed to life. The terminal booted up, showing the normal pharmacy system login. The monitors cycled through their startup sequence, displaying regular security camera feeds. Aisles 7 to 9 showed normal shelving, no corridor, no figures, no light from room 12. The entrance mat was soaked with water, as though someone had stood there dripping for several minutes. Dr. Han appeared in the pharmacy bay doorway. He looked at me, at the wet mat, at the monitors, and nodded slowly. "You sent him away," he said. It wasn't a question. "I think so. Maybe. He asked how to stop coming in for his shift." "And you told him?" "I told him he'd done enough, that he could go home." Dr. Han was quiet for a moment. "No one's managed that before. Previous interactions have been less conclusive. He usually just leaves when his routine completes, then returns the next night." He moved to the terminal, checking something. "The system didn't log any prescription submissions from Evergreen Ward tonight. First time in months. Does that mean it's over?" "I don't know." Dr. Han looked at me with something like respect. "But you did well. You maintained the boundary, refused the prescription, and gave him an exit when he showed awareness. That's more than most people could have done." For the rest of the shift, the pharmacy remained quiet. Normal customers came through with legitimate prescriptions. The monitors showed only the regular store layout. The entrance mat dried, and no mysterious footprints appeared. But at 5:47 a.m., just before dawn, I heard something from the back of the store. A sound like a door closing gently, the kind of sound someone makes when leaving a room where others are sleeping. I checked the monitors. Nothing. Checked the side door to the alley, locked as it had been all night. But the sound had been clear, present, undeniable. Something had left, or arrived, or shifted configuration. I didn't investigate. Some questions have answers that don't improve the situation. When I drove home that morning, the storm had passed, leaving everything washed clean and dripping. the pharmacy's green sign reflected in puddles, and in my rearview mirror I could see the building growing smaller, solid and mundane in the early light. But as I turned onto the main road, I glanced back one last time. Just for a moment, less than a second, the reflection in a puddle showed the building differently. Same footprint, same size, but with different windows, a different entrance configuration. And standing in that entrance, barely visible, was a figure in a hospital gown. Then a car drove through the puddle, and when the water settled, the reflection showed only the normal pharmacy building. I kept driving. I called out sick for the next 2 shifts. Not because I was physically ill, though I felt hollowed out, exhausted in a way that sleep didn't touch, but because I needed time to process what had happened with Marcus Webb, with the prescription written for night staff, with the moment I'd told a ghost he could stop working. The confidence I'd felt during the confrontation had evaporated by the time I reached my apartment, replaced by a creeping uncertainty about what I'd actually accomplished. Had I freed him, banished him, or just told him what he needed to hear to complete that night's routine, ensuring he'd return the next time the conditions aligned? I didn't know, and not knowing sat in my chest like a stone. Rita called on the second day, her voice warm with concern. "Jordan? Dr. Hahn mentioned you were under the weather. Are you okay?" "Yeah," I lied. "Just a stomach bug. Should be back tomorrow." "Take your time. We've got coverage. Dr. Hahn's been pulling doubles to cover your shifts. Insisted on it, actually. Said he wanted to make sure the overnight routine stayed consistent." Something in her tone suggested she knew more than she was saying. That consistent overnight routine meant something specific in the context of Evergreen RX. When I returned on the third night, arriving at my usual 4 p.m., Dr. Hahn was already there, looking more exhausted than I'd ever seen him. His eyes had a hollowed quality, dark circles suggesting sleep deprivation beyond simple overwork. "How was it?" I asked quietly while Rita was helping a customer at the front counter. "Quiet," he said. "No Evergreen ward prescriptions. No visitors between 2 and 3 a.m. No activity on the aisle 7 monitor." He paused. "But the side door keeps unlocking itself. I've relocked it 6 times in the past 2 nights. It's never done that before." "What does that mean?" "I don't know. Could mean the ward's configuration is destabilizing. Routines breaking down now that Webb isn't maintaining them. Could mean something else is trying to establish new routines. Could mean nothing." He rubbed his eyes. "Time will tell." The shift proceeded normally until just before midnight, when I went to the back room for my break. The incident notebook was sitting on the folding table, open to a new page. Someone had written an entry in handwriting I didn't recognize. Shakier than the previous entries, letters formed with obvious effort. Marcus Webb, Night Supervisor, Evergreen Ward. October 15th, 1974, November 7th, 2024. 50 years of shift work finally concluded. To whoever sent me home, thank you. I couldn't figure out how to stop coming in. Now I remember there's a house waiting, a wife who's been waiting, a morning I was supposed to see. I'm going to go find them now. M.W. The entry was dated that morning, 6:47 a.m., the exact time I'd heard the door closing sound. I stared at it for a long moment, then carefully turned to the next blank page and wrote, "Jordan Malik, Night Tech, November 7th, 2024. Marcus Webb appeared with room 12 prescription. Did not fill it. Cut power to pharmacy bay to break the routine loop. Webb showed awareness and asked how to stop coming to work. Told him he'd done enough and could go home. He left through the front doors and dissolved in the parking lot. System shows no Evergreen Ward prescription since. Possible that his routine was the primary driver of ongoing phenomenon. Monitoring for changes. When I returned to the pharmacy bay, Dr. Hahn had the laminated rules sheet out, studying it with a frown. "Rule 5, he said. Never fill prescriptions for room 12 after midnight. That rule was developed about 6 years into this building's operation, after 3 techs filled room 12 scripts and reported complications. But before that, the rule was different. It was just verify all prescriptions from Evergreen Ward with the overnight pharmacist before filling. What changed? Room 12's prescriptions started arriving more frequently. They started being more specific, naming staff members, including instructions that felt like commands rather than medical directions. The rule became absolute prohibition rather than verification because verification wasn't enough. We had to refuse entirely. He set down the sheet. But if Webb was the one generating those prescriptions, maintaining that specific routine because he'd never completed his last medication round before the fire and he's now released from that obligation, the rule might not be necessary anymore, I finished. Or it might become more necessary, Dr. Hahn countered. Nature abhors a vacuum. If Webb was occupying the night supervisor role in the ward's echo and that role is now empty, something else might try to fill it. We need to stay vigilant. He was right to be cautious, but as the shift continued, midnight passing, then 1 a.m., then 2, I noticed changes. Subtle ones, easy to miss if you hadn't been watching for them. The automatic doors didn't open randomly, the fluorescent lights held steady, no flickering. The pharmacy coolers cycled through their normal patterns without the slight irregularity I'd learned to associate with the ward's presence. At 2:20 a.m., during the window when the woman in the hospital gown usually appeared, I watched the entrance closely. Nothing. Just rain, an empty parking lot, and the steady glow of sodium vapor lights. At 3:05 a.m., I deliberately walked down aisle 7 and glanced up at the convex mirror. It showed exactly what it should show. My own reflection slightly distorted by the mirror's curve, surrounded by the familiar shelving of cold and flu remedies. No delay in movement. No speaking mouth. Just normal reflection doing what reflections do. I returned to the pharmacy bay and found Dr. Hahn watching the security monitors with an expression I couldn't quite read. "It's quieter," he said. "Isn't it?" "Yes. I'm not sure how I feel about that." I understood. For 12 years he'd navigated the overlap between pharmacy and ward, learned to recognize the patterns, developed routines that ensured safety through careful adherence to rules. The ward's presence had been constant, predictable in its way. And now something fundamental had shifted, and we didn't know yet whether the shift was improvement or prelude to something different. The rest of the week proceeded similarly. Quiet nights, no ward prescriptions, no anomalous customers, no reality bleed between configurations. Other staff began commenting on it. Rita mentioned that the weird vibe the store had always had at night seemed diminished, and the front-end manager noted that the automatic doors had stopped triggering randomly. By my 30th night shift, I was starting to believe we'd actually resolved something. That my interaction with Marcus Webb had been the key that unlocked 50 years of temporal loop. That the ward's echo would now fade naturally, leaving only a pharmacy operating normal hours in normal space. That's when I found the prescription in my locker. I opened the locker at the beginning of my shift, reaching for the jacket I always kept there, and a paper fell out. A prescription form, written in the same style as the one Marcus Webb had tried to submit. The paper was warm, slightly damp, as though someone with feverish hands had folded it. I didn't want to read it. Every instinct said to burn it immediately, to not even acknowledge its presence. But I needed to know. I unfolded it carefully. The prescriber field was blank, no ward name, no physician name, just an empty line. The patient name made my blood run cold. Patient, Malik Jordan. Medication, none. Prescribed directions, report to room 12 for evaluation. New night supervisor required for continued ward operations. Previous supervisor has been discharged. At the bottom, in the same shaky handwriting that had written the notebook entry thanking me, was a note. "You helped me leave. Thank you, but someone has to stay. The patients still need rounds. The medications still need distribution. You understand the routines now. You know how to help them. Please consider taking the position. M.W." I stood there, prescription shaking in my hands, understanding washing over me like ice water. I hadn't freed Marcus Webb from obligation. I'd just helped him pass that obligation to someone else, to me. I'd demonstrated competence in managing the ward's echo, shown understanding of the routines, successfully navigated the boundary between configurations. In doing so, I'd marked myself as a candidate for the role he was vacating. The ward didn't need Marcus Webb specifically. It needed a night supervisor, someone to maintain the routines, to complete the rounds, to ensure the patterns continued. And it had identified me as his replacement. I looked up at the locker mirror, just a small rectangular mirror on the inside of the door, the kind people use to check their appearance. My reflection looked back at me, normal and present. But as I watched, my reflection's name tag changed. Instead of Jordan Malik, pharmacy technician, it now read, J. Malik, night supervisor, Evergreen Ward. I slammed the locker shut and went directly to Dr. Hahn. He listened to my explanation, read the prescription, and his expression darkened with something like resignation. "I was afraid of this," he said quietly. "Webb's departure didn't end the routines. It just created a vacancy. And you've demonstrated the exact qualities the ward needs in a night supervisor. Calm under pressure, willing to engage with the phenomenon, capable of navigating both configurations. I don't want the job." "That's irrelevant to the ward. It doesn't operate on want. It operates on need and pattern." He sat heavily on the folding chair. "But you have a choice. You always have a choice. You can refuse the position, ignore the prescription, don't acknowledge the invitation, maintain your current role as pharmacy tech. The ward may escalate its recruitment efforts, or it may eventually identify a different candidate. Or you can quit. Leave Evergreen RX entirely, find work somewhere that doesn't sit on top of a temporal overlap. You'd be clear of the ward's reach once you stopped being present during the active hours. What would happen to the overnight shift if I quit?" Dr. Hahn was quiet for a long moment. "They'd hire someone new. Someone who doesn't know the rules, doesn't understand what they're navigating. That person would learn through consequence rather than prevention, and the ward, with an empty night supervisor position, would likely be more aggressive in its recruitment efforts. So my options are accept a ghost job supervising dead patients, or quit and condemn whoever replaces me to figure this out from scratch." "Yes," Dr. Hahn said. "I'm sorry, but that's the situation." I looked at the prescription still clutched in my hand, at the note thanking me for help that had apparently only transferred the problem. "What would you do?" I asked. Dr. Hahn smiled, tired and sad. "I stayed," he said. "I'm still staying, because someone has to maintain the boundary, and I'd rather it be someone who understands what they're doing than someone who doesn't." He paused. "But I've never been offered a ward position. I'm just the pharmacist who dispenses medication to the living. You're being offered something different, something I can't advise you on because I don't fully understand what acceptance would mean." I spent the rest of that shift in a fog of indecision. Customers came and went, prescriptions were filled. The night proceeded according to normal pharmaceutical routines. But I couldn't stop thinking about the offer, the invitation, the terrible logic of it. The ward needed a night supervisor to continue its patterns. I understood those patterns. I'd successfully helped the previous supervisor find release. In the ward's configuration, I was the obvious choice for succession, and if I refused, someone else would eventually fill the role. either willingly or through gradual integration, the kind Miguel had started experiencing before his accident pulled him fully into patient status. At 5:30 a.m., with dawn approaching, I went to the back room and opened the incident notebook. I found a blank page and wrote, Jordan Malik, November 14, 2024. Received invitation to assume night supervisor position for Evergreen Ward Echo. Marcus Webb's departure created vacancy. Ward has identified me as replacement candidate, still deciding whether to accept, refuse, or quit entirely. If anyone reads this in the future, the ward's patterns don't end just because individuals leave. The roles remain seeking new occupants. Be careful which competencies you demonstrate. J.M. I closed the notebook and returned to the pharmacy bay where Dr. Han was preparing to leave for the day. I need a week, I told him, to decide. I need to not be here, not be present during the active hours so I can think clearly without the ward's influence. That's wise, Dr. Han said. I'll cover your shifts personally. Take the time you need. As I drove home through the early morning light, I kept checking my rearview mirror. Not looking for cars, but looking at my own reflection, checking to see if the name tag visible in the mirror still read Night Supervisor, or if it had returned to normal. It flickered between the two, shifting every few seconds as though even my reflection couldn't decide which role I occupied. I still haven't decided. But I know that when I return to Evergreen RX, whether to continue as tech or to formally refuse the ward's offer or to submit my resignation, the decision will matter. Not just for me, but for whoever comes after, for the patterns that continue regardless of individual choices, for the routines that refuse to recognize their own obsolescence. The ward is patient. It has been continuing for 50 years. It can wait another week for my answer. The question is whether I can live with any of the choices available to me. The now hiring sign went up in Evergreen RX's window on a gray morning in late November, 6 weeks after I walked out of the pharmacy for the last time. I drove past it on my way to my new job, daytime data entry at an insurance office 3 towns over, boring and fluorescent lit and blessedly free of temporal overlaps, and felt a complicated mix of relief and guilt. I'd chosen the coward's option. I'd quit, not immediately. I'd taken the week Dr. Han offered me, spent it trying to rationalize a way forward that didn't involve either accepting a position supervising ghost patients or abandoning the night shift to someone unprepared. But every option led to the same conclusion. I couldn't win. I could only choose which way to lose. Accepting the ward's offer meant integrating fully into something that had ended 50 years ago, becoming a permanent fixture in a loop that would outlast my natural lifespan. I'd seen Marcus Webb's exhaustion, the way 50 years of shift work had worn him down to pure routine, personality eroded by repetition. I didn't want that. But refusing while staying at Evergreen RX meant watching the ward escalate its recruitment efforts, likely pulling me in involuntarily through the same gradual integration that had affected Miguel. And it meant being present when they hired my replacement, someone who'd walk into the overlap completely unprepared. So I chose the third option. I left a detailed entry in the incident notebook, updated the rules with everything I'd learned, met with Dr. Han one last time to transfer all institutional knowledge I could articulate, and submitted my 2-week notice. Dr. Han had looked at me with understanding and disappointment in equal measure. I can't blame you, he said. This isn't a burden anyone should carry. But you were good at navigating the boundary. Whoever comes next may not be. Then train them well, I'd replied. Give them the notebook first day. Make them memorize the rules before their first solo shift. I always do, Dr. Han said quietly. But some people don't believe until they experience, and by then it's often too late. Now 6 weeks later, I watched the now hiring sign and wondered who would respond to it. The position offered competitive pay, full benefits, overnight differential, all the same incentives that had attracted me when I'd been broke and desperate in Portland. Someone else was about to learn what that differential actually compensated for. Inside the pharmacy, visible through the window, I could see preparations for the new hire. Rita was restocking shelves, probably getting ready for evening training shift. Dr. Han would arrive around 3 p.m. to begin his overnight coverage. And somewhere in the back room, the laminated rules waited under the register. The incident notebook sat on the break room table, and the pharmacy operated in daylight hours as though nothing impossible ever happened there. But I knew better. The ward's echo was still present, still running its routines between midnight and 6 a.m. Marcus Webb was gone, but his absence had only created vacancy, not resolution, and the ward needed a night supervisor. It would keep looking until it found one. 3 weeks after I drove past that hiring sign, a young woman named Sasha Chen accepted the overnight pharmacy technician position at Evergreen RX. She was 24, recently certified, carrying student loans that made Evergreen's overnight differential irresistible. She'd read the Reddit threads about haunted retail jobs and found them entertaining but implausible. She'd watched horror videos about rules to survive and enjoyed the creative writing but didn't believe any of it was real. She liked the idea of quiet nights, steady work, a small town where she could save money and figure out her next steps. The hiring manager had been honest about the isolation, the overnight hours, the fact that previous techs sometimes found the work unsettling. But Sasha had worked retail through college. She understood difficult customers, weird night shift energy, the way empty stores could feel eerie. How bad could it be? On her first training shift, Rita walked her through the basics with practiced efficiency. The computer system was intuitive. The insurance protocols were standard. The inventory organization made sense. Everything was professional, well-maintained, exactly what she'd expected. At 11 p.m., as Rita prepared to leave, Dr. Han arrived for the overnight shift. He was quiet, methodical, exactly the kind of experienced pharmacist Sasha appreciated. Someone who knew the work well enough not to micromanage. They worked together for the first hour, establishing routine. Dr. Han showed her where supplies were kept, explained the filing system, demonstrated the label printer's quirks. Professional, normal. Then at midnight, he pulled out a laminated sheet and set it on the counter between them. Previous overnight staff found this helpful, he said, his tone carefully neutral. I recommend reading it before your first solo shift. Sasha picked up the sheet. The title made her smile. Evergreen RX, Night Shift Survival Rules. She actually laughed, a short, nervous sound. Is this like a hazing thing? Dr. Han didn't smile. He simply watched her with tired eyes, waiting. Sasha read, Rule 1. Lock the side pharmacy door at 11 p.m. and do not open it for anyone, even staff, until 6 a.m. Rule 3. If a customer enters between 2:14 and 2:29 a.m. and does not track rainwater or dirt, do not speak to them. Let them browse. They will leave. Rule 5. Never, under any circumstances, fill a prescription written for room 12 after midnight. We do not serve that ward. Rule 7. Do not look directly into the convex mirror above aisle 7 after 3 a.m. There were more. 12 rules total, plus a 13th written in different handwriting at the bottom. Sasha looked up at Dr. Han, expecting some indication that this was a joke, an elaborate initiation ritual for new hires. His expression hadn't changed. I don't understand, she said carefully. You don't need to, Dr. Han replied. Just follow them. Everyone who lasted did. The word lasted settled uncomfortably in Sasha's chest. What happens if I don't? Dr. Han was quiet for a long moment, then, some things are easier to prevent than to fix. The rules exist because people learned them the hard way. I'm simply saving you the education. He picked up his tea and moved toward the back room, pausing in the doorway. "I'll be doing inventory counts most of the night. You'll handle the counter. If you need me, use the intercom. And if I have questions about the rules?" "You won't," Dr. Han said. "When the situation arises, you'll recognize it." Then he was gone, leaving Sasha alone at the counter with the laminated rules and the growing awareness that she'd accepted a job without asking nearly enough questions. She looked at the rules again. The specificity bothered her. Not just time ranges, but details like "does not track rainwater," references to room 12 as though it were a location she should recognize, warnings about mirrors that only applied after certain hours. This wasn't safety protocol. This read like instructions for navigating something that shouldn't exist. Sasha told herself it was just small-town weirdness, the kind of superstitious ritual that develops in isolated workplaces. She'd worked retail long enough to know that every store developed its own culture, its own in-jokes and traditions. But as midnight crept toward 1 a.m. and the store settled into its after-hours rhythm, fluorescent lights humming, refrigerators cycling, automatic doors occasionally hissing open for no visible reason, she found herself reading the rules again and again. Outside, rain began to fall. The green pharmacy sign reflected in the wet parking lot like something drowning, pulsing its signal to no one at all. In the back room, Dr. Han pulled out the incident notebook and turned to a blank page. He hesitated, pen hovering over paper, then wrote, "Dr. Henry Han, overnight pharmacist, November 28, 2024. New night tech Sasha Chen started today. Provided rules and initial orientation. Previous tech Jordan Malik chose to leave rather than navigate the ward's offer of night supervisor position. Vacancy remains. Monitoring for escalation. Ward has been unusually quiet since Webb's departure. No prescriptions, minimal activity, but side door continues unlocking itself nightly. Pattern suggests reorganization rather than resolution. We'll observe how Ward responds to new staff presence, hoping Chen proves adaptable." He dated the entry, closed the notebook, and returned to his inventory count. In the pharmacy bay, Sasha processed her first overnight prescription, glancing occasionally at the laminated rules that sat beside her keyboard. The instructions made no sense, but something about the way Dr. Han had presented them, no humor, no elaboration, just calm insistence, suggested he believed them completely. She decided she'd follow them, at least for the first week. Better to humor what might be harmless superstition than to test rules that might describe something real. It was a reasonable decision made by a rational person in an uncertain situation. But in the shadows behind aisle 7, in the reflection of the convex mirror that Sasha hadn't yet noticed, something that had been waiting for weeks finally stirred with interest. New staff, new presence during the active hours, new potential. The ward's routines required personnel, and personnel required recruitment, and recruitment required time and patience and the careful identification of candidates who demonstrated the right qualities. Curiosity, competence, the ability to navigate impossible situations while maintaining composure. Marcus Webb had maintained the position for 50 years. Jordan Malik had refused, but Sasha Chen was here now, learning the rules, adapting to the overlap, present during the hours when both configurations existed simultaneously. The ward could be patient. It had been continuing for decades. It could wait as long as necessary to identify the right person for the role it needed filled. In the break room, tucked behind outdated policy binders, the incident notebook waited for its next entry. On the counter, the laminated rules gleamed under fluorescent light, procedures written in response to phenomena that refused to recognize their own obsolescence. And in the parking lot, visible only in reflection, a figure in a hospital gown stood watching the pharmacy's windows, waiting to see if the new night staff would follow the patterns or if they would need to be taught. The automatic doors whispered open, though no one entered. The night continued as it always had, running routines in parallel configurations that most people would never see. But Sasha would see them, eventually. Everyone who worked overnight at Evergreen RX did. The only question was whether she'd learn to navigate them through prevention or through consequence. The ward waited for the answer with infinite institutional patience. And somewhere in the overlap between what was and what refused to stop being, Room 12's door stood slightly ajar, waiting for the next person who would finally, after all these years, complete the rounds.